My name is Karen Dace, and I'm the Associate Vice President for Diversity here at the University of Utah. Thank you for attending the keynote address presented as part of our annual Martin Luther King Jr. celebration. Borrowed from our keynote speaker's upcoming book, this year's theme, The Challenge for a Multiracial Democracy in America, focuses on the complexity of the quest for inclusion, voice, and social justice for all Americans in systems that often desire to make those forced to the margins of society more like those in the so-called mainstream, and to silence the voices of those whose ideas are new, different, or challenging. Although in 2005 we celebrate the life and legacy of Reverend King, we must remember that during his lifetime there was very little celebration of the work for which he gave his life, indeed for which he lost his life. Hence, the programs this week continue in this vein, challenging, questioning, and creating spaces for dialogue and a greater understanding as we all try to come to terms with what it means to live in a multiracial society striving for multiracial democracy. The goal of the Planning Committee is that the discussions begun this week will continue throughout the year. That seems only fitting as we celebrate the life of one person, Martin Luther King Jr., who lost his life nearly 37 years ago and yet continues to impact the lives of everyone who calls him or herself an American. And now it is my pleasure to present the University of Utah President, Michael Young, who will officially welcome you to the keynote address. He will be followed by Dr. Lisa Flores, Director of the Chicano Studies Program, who will introduce our keynote speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to stand here today in front of this terrific crowd, but to stand under a picture of Martin Luther King. I feel like in some ways this is a figure that has shaped so much of my life and what I think about equality, what I think about the United States and the kind of society that we're trying to create here. I had the privilege some years ago of serving on a faculty with a fellow named Jack Greenberg. Jack Greenberg had actually been Thurgood Marshall's assistant at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund for many, many years and had been one of the principal lawyers in the litigation of Brown versus the Board of Education. And when Justice Marshall became Solicitor General and then Supreme Court Justice, Jack took his place as head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And I had an opportunity to travel extensively with Jack by the time he had arrived at the Columbia University faculty. He was involved in international human rights as well as domestic civil rights issues, and we traveled on international human rights affairs. And I was struck as he told me countless hours of stories about that litigation, about the way in which school systems were structured throughout much of the United States. We sometimes think of that as being an issue related to the South, but it was not in any way limited to the South. Indeed, at least 3 of the cases involved northern schools, Kansas, Delaware, and Massachusetts. The stories that he told about the courage and the heroism of the people involved in that case were truly extraordinary and moving and humbling to me. As I realized what people were willing to do simply to realize the promises contained in the Declaration of Independence and the promises contained in the other founding documents of our country to achieve the equality that they so richly deserved and had been so long denied. A few years ago, I was appointed by the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court to serve on the Brown versus Board of Education 50th Anniversary Commemorative Commission. And in that capacity had a chance again to reflect on that decision, but this time in a somewhat more activist way and a somewhat more scholarly way. And as I learned more about the history of the United States during that time and the time leading up to it, a number of things occurred to me. Among the things that occurred to me that were most unsettling were the role that the academics played in the post-Civil War period during the instigation of the Jim Crow laws. And what was doubly troubling for me is how some of the great academic institutions, Columbia University being foremost among those, were home to some of these academics who laid the intellectual foundations and justifications, the entire spurious intellectual justifications and foundations for some of those Jim Crow laws. But it heightened again my sense of how people can show such courage on one side of an issue and such ignorance and blindness on the other side of the issue. And that so many of you would gather today to talk about this issue again as we go forward after the tragic death of Martin Luther King, after that epical decision of Brown versus the Board of Education, is a great tribute to all of you, this university, to the dialogue that will be generated, and as Karen so articulately says, continue throughout the coming year here at this university and long, long into the future. In a way that I hope will encourage and enable us to show the kind of courage that those people who are on the right side of this issue showed so many years ago, and help shape the kind of society to which we are at least beginning to stumble here in the United States. And so I extend special thank you to Dr. Dace and her office for all the terrific events that they have arranged and scheduled, as well as the committee. A particular welcome to Dr. Carlos Munoz, who is with us today. We recognize your extraordinarily important and significant scholarship in this area, as well as the long legacy of teaching that you leave behind, and the many, many students who have been launched into the world with your insight and your guidance. It's a pleasure and honor to have you with us here as well. And of course to the committee itself, the Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Committee, for planning a very rich and thoughtful celebration. One of the action-oriented activities related to this week, of course, extends to the end of January and is fittingly, for the University of Utah, a community service project. We're collecting dictionaries, school supplies, new and used children's books, written in a variety of languages, whatever languages you happen to have, to benefit the West High School Family Literacy Center. Our English department partners with that high school in serving a broad range of students under the direction of our College of Humanities and our wonderful dean of that college, Dr. Newman, who is with us. We're striving to support those families and give them the same opportunities for which Dr. King so warmly aspired for all people. As he suggested in one of his talks, the good neighbor who looks beyond the external accidents and discerns those inner qualities that make all men human and therefore brothers is the key. And so we each hope that we can all in some small personal way contribute to the realization of that dream. Urge the university community to join us in that project. More information about it and the details can be obtained on the Office of Diversity's website. In conjunction with this celebration, each year the university recognizes individuals like Dr. Munoz and others who are continuing the work that Dr. King began 40 years ago. Today, 6 middle and high school students will be honored as winners of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Essay Contest. Want to extend our deep congratulations to them. I think they are with us today. Are they all with us today? We're hoping. And so we'd like them to stand as we introduce them and express our congratulations to them publicly. Matthew White. Where's Mr. White? Darren Linder. Well, you know, they must actually be going to class today. Erica Lovell. Justin Parnell. There's Erica. Justin. Justin Parnell stood up and then sat down too quickly. And overall winners, Julie Flink and Laura Ray Thomas. Our congratulations to you for those wonderful essays and the very thoughtful way in which you approached As you leave the hall today, there will be applications to the University of Utah, and we hope to see you in this audience as students in a few years as well. On Monday, we'll honor another group of students, the 2005 Martin Luther King Youth Leadership Awards, which will go to 22 middle and high school students across Utah. And in conjunction with that, let me share with you a little bit of a very moving letter that one of their teachers wrote in nomination of six of these students, written by Amalea Nuatale, for 6 students from the Horizonte Instruction and Training Center here in Salt Lake City. And this is what she said. She said, in a time when many youth's dreams are substituted with music videos of hyper body types and imaginations negotiated with violence, and communication represented as noise, it has become hard to dream. It has become very hard to dream. And she goes on to say, as a teacher, it's become hard even to sleep. But Amalea goes on to describe her students, one of whom in particular she mentions, who is Mele Tule, whom she teaches in a film documentary class. And this is what she said. She said, Mele was always peering into windows or through the glass doors of the school. She has brought the same approach to challenging her class to examine and redefine themselves. The other night I slept, like I haven't in a long time, Amelia writes. The other night I dreamt my students were speaking as leaders amongst crowds of people. I'm certain this is the present and the future. I hope through this letter you'll be able to imagine why a teacher would nominate 6 young brothers and sisters. And we are delighted to be able to honor those for the contributions they've made for mutual understanding here in Utah. So congratulations to all those students, to the faculty and the students here at the university for keeping Dr. King's dreams alive. Students always have been the ones who remind us that there's power in dreams. So I urge you to participate. I urge you to join these activities, and in the process of doing so, to do again what we know makes Dr. King's vision so important and so vibrant. And I'll conclude with one last thought. I, for many years, was dean of a law school back in Washington, D.C., and we would graduate about 800 or 900 students every year, and I was instructed at the end of that graduation ceremony, while my hand was resting in ice after shaking those 800 hands, to give them a charge to send them out into the world. And the charge I always read from was from a speech, not a very well-known speech, but an absolutely extraordinary speech that Dr. King gave in Nashville, Tennessee, in which he had an important injunction to the lawyers, which was to never underestimate the importance of the law. And he stressed that the law could not change the hearts of the heartless, but it could restrain their hearts, and it couldn't necessarily make people think someone was equal, but it could make them treat them as equal. An important charge for lawyers and all of us thinking about institutions and governments and structures. But what was even more important in the talk, in my judgment, is he went on to talk about those kinds of things that can't be legislated, those kinds of things that can't be regulated and controlled, those kinds of things that have to be engraven not on the legal rule books but on the heart. And he talked about the ways in which we need to learn to treat each other in ways that don't require legal restrictions, that don't require legal oversight, but to treat each other in ways that allow each person to realize their full potential. And to that end and to that vision, we invite all of you to share with us this exciting week. Thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome again. It is my very great pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker. I had the opportunity to talk a little bit with our speaker and learned what an amazing man he is. The work that he does is not going to be captured by my brief introduction of him, and I do hope that you see what I saw in my conversation with him, and that is his spirit and his generosity. Just as a brief example of that, we talked for just a moment before here, and we were looking for a woman who works in the community, who works with with kids struggling with various issues, and we were trying to figure out if somewhere in his schedule today he has maybe an hour free, we could swing him out there. And actually, he was coming to me to say, is there a way we can get out there so that he can talk to these kids? And trust me, this man has a very booked day ahead of him. Today's speaker, Dr. Carlos Munoz, Jr., comes to us today as Professor Emeritus at the University of California, Berkeley. Widely recognized as one of the most distinguished Latino scholars in the nation, he has been active in so many venues as a teacher, an author, activist, and a leader. He describes himself as coming from the barrio in El Paso, Texas, born to a poor working-class Mexican immigrant family. From that background, he has achieved what many of us don't even begin to dream about doing. His academic career perhaps began at Los Angeles City College, where he earned his associate's degree in 1964. From there, he went to California State University, Los Angeles, and earned his Bachelor of Arts with honors in political science. And then finally, his PhD in government from the Claremont Graduate School in 1973. His career, which has thus far spanned 36 years and is by no means over, includes many, many notable moments. Just a few of these to share with you today. In 1968, he was the founding chair of the first Mexican-American Studies department in the country, and that was at Cal State University, Los Angeles. He is the author of the book, Youth Identity Power, The Chicano Movement. This book has gone through already 10 editions. It was absolutely central to the 1996 PBS series, Chicano, History of the Mexican-American Civil Rights Movement, and it was recognized with the Gustavus Myers Book Award. He's currently writing 3 books. The Challenge for a Multiracial Democracy in America. The second is a biographical novel on the life and times of Dr. Ernesto Galarza. And to demonstrate his incredible breadth of knowledge, experience, and interests, the Latino Experience in Major League Baseball. He's also a recognized expert on ethnic and racial politics, multiculturalism, immigration, and affirmative action. He has appeared on PBS, NBC, CNN, ABC, CBS, Univision, and Telemundo. He is a syndicated columnist with the Progressive Media Project, and his columns appear nationally through Knight Ridder Publications. They are also online at latino.com and have been distributed through the BBC. As a political leader, he's been quite active in several organizations, again, just to name some: the Faculty for Human Rights in Central America, the Faculty Against Apartheid in South Africa, the Rainbow Coalition. Indeed, in 1988, he served as a key advisor to presidential candidate Jesse Jackson, co-founder of the Institute for Multiracial Justice, and co-founder of Latinos Unidos, a grassroots community organization in Berkeley, California. Currently, he remains involved in several struggles for affirmative action and immigration rights. Not surprisingly, he has been awarded with several different awards, including receiving the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Cesar Chavez and Rosa Parks Award, being listed in Who's Who among Hispanic Americans, and being listed in the Latino Encyclopedia. He speaks regularly at schools, colleges, and universities. Indeed, he told us that former students and friends who teach in the K-12 system regularly call him and say, hey, can you come out and talk to my 4th graders? And he does it on a very regular basis. And again, somewhere in there, he takes the time to enjoy such things as baseball and boxing, and appeared, from my brief discussion and my limited background, to be quite knowledgeable in both. Immediately following our talk, he will be doing a book signing right behind you. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Carlos Munoz, Jr.
Boy, I'm telling you, all the people of Utah and Salt Lake City that I've had the privilege to meet today have made me feel so welcomed, so welcomed. I have so much love in my heart for all of you today. And I want to share with you some of my thoughts that I have been able to shape through my life of struggle. Not so much as a scholar, but as a fighter for freedom, for social justice, for human rights, for peace. And the man who has been most responsible in my life, or for making my life the way it is the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He inspired me not only for a life of activism, but inspired me to study the philosophy of nonviolence and to apply it to the struggles that I participate in. I am a Vietnam War era veteran as well. And he inspired me back in the 60s when I was, along with John Kerry, a member of the Vietnam War Veterans Against the War. Dr. King inspired me to speak out against the war in Vietnam. And I have been speaking out against war ever since and putting my life on the line for peace, human rights, and social justice. Before I go on, I want to again thank the gracious people who have made me most welcome, Dr. Karen Darcy for one, and the students that I met last night and colleagues of mine here in ethnic studies, Lisa Flores in particular. Thank you so much for inviting me and giving me this precious moment to share with you today. I have learned in my life that we must live the moment to the fullest. There's no guarantee for tomorrow. And we must do that. Yes. We are very blessed. I am very blessed. I feel very blessed. I thank God every day that I'm still alive. I came very close to death as well, like many of us did, like Dr. King did. And I survived, thank God. Today, we are in the midst of a historic moment, a profound crisis in our nation and in the world. It is therefore of critical importance that we remember what the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. fought for during his lifetime so that we may properly celebrate who he was and what he fought for. And in order to do, if we do that, we get the inspiration we need to continue the challenges of today, which in my mind are the building of an authentic, multiracial democracy in our nation. Dr. King inspired people of all walks of life to tap into their inner spirit and courage to commit their lives to the struggle for racial equality, social justice, human rights, and peace. His leadership of the civil rights movement, as most of us know, or should know, inspired many young African American, white American, and other people of color to get involved in the struggle. In my case, he inspired me and other Mexican Americans to create our own civil rights movement in the Southwest. We called it the Chicano movement. Like African Americans in the South, Mexican Americans also have a long history of racial and ethnic inequality and political inequality. We never were able to keep our history alive until we of the 1960s generation rediscovered it. We reconnected to whom we have been and who we are today and who we will be tomorrow. We are an indigenous people. I, for example, am half Yaqui, Native American on my mother's side, and half Mexican on my father's side. And many of us here today also share that heritage. We don't know it. Many of us don't know that. We haven't been taught it. We haven't been able to understand who we are. So our movement in the 60s was not only a civil rights movement, but it was also a movement to recapture who we were, who we are. We call ourselves Chicanos. Chicano meant to us that we are an indigenous people proud of our Mexican cultural roots, and most importantly, proud of a long history of resistance and struggle against those who historically dominated or tried to dominate our ancestors in the past. So we organized our movement. And like the movement in the South, we were also jailed, beaten, and killed for protesting and speaking out against racism throughout the Southwest. In 1968, we organized against segregation in the Mexican Americans of East Los Angeles. Over 10,000 high school students walked out of the schools in protest. It was the first time that Mexican Americans had marched against racial and ethnic equality in the history of the United States. East Los Angeles became our Selma, our Birmingham. Weeks after that student walkout, it was a strike also, I was one of 13 civil rights activists indicted for conspiracy to disturb the peace. We each faced 66 years in prison for the crime, end quote, of conspiring to commit misdemeanors to disrupt the educational system of the city of Los Angeles. It took 2 years for the high courts in the state of California to free us from those conspiracy charges. The state appellate court ruled finally that we were innocent by virtue of the First Amendment to our Constitution, freedom of speech. It turned out the FBI forgot about that little detail because their counterintelligence program that was known as COINTELPRO, the forerunner of what is called today the Patriot Act, targeted not only Dr. King and many other civil rights movement activists, but targeted us as well. The COINTELPRO program included police, military intelligence agencies that conducted political surveillance of civil rights activists identified as key leaders. The FBI placed agents in the organizations that we created in the movement, paid provocateurs to disrupt our peaceful nonviolent activities, placed character assassination stories in the local newspapers. They did all possible to disrupt our struggle. But we didn't stop. We continued. And we are continuing today. Our movement adopted Dr. King's philosophy of nonviolence and echoed his ideas for racial equality and justice, and we applied them to Mexican Americans and other Latinos. Our movement also won significant victories that led to more political representation, equal opportunity in employment, and access to higher education via affirmative action programs. We were able to establish Chicano studies programs, black studies, ethnic studies as well, and all the rest. So today, we should celebrate and remember those collective victories. Most importantly, we must remember those who, like Dr. King, put their lives on the line in the struggle for racial equality. Because of Dr. King and his generation of activists of the 60s, there are more black and Latino faces visible in the entertainment and professional sports industry than there were back in the 60s. There are more black and Latino faces in the U.S. Congress, state and local governments here and there. There are more black and Latino scholars, writers, poets, artists, and professionals in all walks of careers. But racial inequality, ethnic inequality remain alive and well today, tragically. De jure or legal segregation has given way to de facto segregation. Poor and working class black and Latino children continue to be segregated in the public schools, especially in the inner city school districts of our nation's largest cities. Latinos are now, for example, the most segregated student population in the nation. And they have the highest dropout rate of all students. In higher education, the affirmative programs have been either terminated or watered down. The consequence is that black and Latino student enrollments have been drastically declining in public colleges and universities across the nation. At my own university at Berkeley, I can tell you that black students are almost invisible, except on the football team and the basketball team. What does that tell you? Those who have struggled or led the struggle against affirmative action and the ideas of Dr. King for laying out an equal playing field have appropriately, or effectively I should say, appropriated Dr. King's ideas and vision for a colorblind society. They have successfully redefined affirmative action as racism in reverse, because it is, they say, argue, discriminatory to white students. Many people of color, unfortunately, have bought into that definition in today's political world. One of them, by the name of Ward Connerly, one of the, or I should say one of my, but I hate to say that, but one of the regents of my university, has been the person who has led the struggle against affirmative action. He is an African American. He is a product of affirmative action. We all know about Dr. King's historic speech, I Have a Dream. I know it well because I had just come out of the Army when I heard it, and it inspired me. We know that one of the famous quotes from that speech, right? I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, right? We know that. Beautiful. But we should also know and remember and learn that Dr. King's vision was not simply a colorblind society. It was not limited to racial equality. He made clear in other speeches, equally dramatic, that the struggle against racism was directly connected to the issues of poverty, war, and peace and democracy. In his Beyond Vietnam speech, for example, he spoke out against the war in Vietnam because, as he said, it was a war. It was the enemy of the poor. He vividly saw the connection between the war in Vietnam and the struggle against poverty and racial equality. Let me quote from this speech because many of you, if not most of you, haven't really heard that one. That's not popularized as much as I Have a Dream. I'm going to quote just a few words. This is a very lengthy speech, it's all of his words. It became clear to me that the war was doing far more than devastating the hopes of the poor at home. It was sending their sons and their brothers and their husbands to fight, to die in extraordinary high proportions relative to the rest of the population. We were taking the black young men who had been crippled by our society and sending them 8,000 miles away to guarantee liberties in Southeast Asia, which they had not found in Southwest Georgia and East Harlem. So we have been repeatedly faced with the cruel irony of watching Negro and white boys on TV screens as they kill and die together for a nation that has been unable to seat them together in the same schools. So we watch them in brutal solidarity, burning their huts of a poor village, but we realize that they would hardly live on the same block in Chicago. I could not be silent in the face of such cruel manipulation of the poor. End quote. Powerful. It was powerful to me. And yes, we can argue that we have democracy in Georgia and East Harlem and other parts, but then we have Florida and Ohio to tell us otherwise. If he were alive today, I have no doubt in my mind that he would be right alongside me and those of us who have been speaking out against the war in Iraq. Because once again, black and Latino soldiers are dying in higher numbers proportionate to the population as they were during the Vietnam War. Many of us have already broken the silence against the war in Iraq, but we need to remind those who have not that Dr. King would also have wanted us to act and not be intimidated by those who tell us it is unpatriotic to openly criticize our government and our president during time of a war. We must have the same courage that Dr. King had during Vietnam and demand that the war be stopped immediately so that no more American soldiers and innocent Iraqi people die. We must, like he did, demand that the billions being spent in Iraq must be diverted to fight poverty at home. Dr. King's ideas remain vibrant to those of us committed to social justice, human rights, and peace. The words he wrote and spoke on the issues of his time remain so meaningful today. We must put them into practice. We must go beyond celebration to practice, to action. The words are there for us to inspire us. We must keep his revolutionary spirit alive in our struggle to build an authentic multiracial democracy committed to social justice, human rights, and peace. Because of Dr. King, I also have a dream for today. I may not realize it in my lifetime because the challenge is great. It is dangerous. It is not going to be easy. But we must go in that direction. We must follow that path toward a multiracial democracy. I have a dream that Americans of all colors, religions, sexual preference, men and women, will give birth to an authentic multiracial democracy. A democracy that will promote racial and ethnic diversity and equality. A democracy that will promote social justice, religious tolerance, and peace at home and abroad. A democracy with a government that will include a representative of every diverse group at the table of political power. A government that will be there on behalf of the people, not the military, industrial, corporate complex. I dream of a democracy where there is a national political multi-party electoral system, where candidates for elective office include the poor and the working class. Not just those who are rich or middle class. I dream of a democracy where every vote will count. I dream of a democracy where human needs are prioritized and not the needs of the rich and the corporations. Where health care and education are defined as human rights. A democracy that prioritizes youth as the most important investment for the future of our nation and builds more schools instead of prisons. This is the dream that Dr. King and his generation started, and that today's generation, and I see a lot of you from the high school and middle school, your generation, okay, the college generation too. I see you today, your lovely faces, glowing with energy, enthusiasm to learn so that you can make the world a better place. I see you as having that responsibility. Okay? You are going to be the ones to carry us to the conclusion of the path that Dr. King started, that others of us have followed, and you're going to end in your generation. We were able to make some changes to make our nation better, but like I said before, we must go beyond celebration of our victories and apply the lessons of yesterday to today. The stakes are much higher now because, as I mentioned earlier, our nation and the world are engulfed in what I consider the most critical crisis and historical moment for mankind and womankind. What I have learned in my lifetime is that struggle is life, and life is struggle. I'm a grandfather now, and yes, I thought at one time I could retire, really, enjoy my grandchildren, but I can't do that. I can't do that. I must keep on fighting. And yes, I find time for my grandchildren. Don't worry about it. I do. And my children, too. Even though they're not children anymore. They're adults. But yes, life is struggle, and struggle is life. But most importantly, I want you all to keep in mind that the victory is in the struggle. That's very important. Very. So we want to leave time for discussion, a few minutes. So I want to conclude by saying love, peace, and justice to you all.